Hello, my name is Butterfield, and I'm going to be talking to you about disability in other cultures, which is my persuasive speech. Around the world, disability is not recognized by developing countries because they don't have equal rights to the disabled people around the world compared to developed countries like Israel, the United States, Japan, South Korea, and Western Europe, which to provide disability rights by their laws. And some developing countries like Latin America and Africa need to get help from Western organizations such as the Global Autism Project, for example. How many of you seen African American, Asian, Latino, Jewish, Hindu, Native American, European, or Islamic cultures that treat them differently than American culture, like on TV that I saw in my childhood of the 1990s and 2000s? In many cultures, like in Africa, disability was viewed as the creation of the devil and sometimes excluded from normal societies in the case of the Haitian religion of voodoo and West Africa, because it really came through the Atlantic slave trade during the Caribbean years and the slavery years before it was abolished in the 19th century. And sometimes African children who were cursed with this disability were excluded from normal society compared to the United States. In my childhood, I had a lot of speech and ABA therapies growing up because I had trouble speaking with autism and I mispronounced words very well, like a foreign language. And I really dislike ABA therapy because it's like dog training, which is by aversion therapy by Pavlov. And as an alternative, I just did improvisational comedy as a form of acting therapy, like Konstantin Stanislavski's method acting methods, in order to do well, in order to listen well, and communicate well, in order to do auditions and job interviews in the future. My parents wanted me to be included in a neurotypical society with no discrimination against people with disabilities like me that inspired children to give hope and adults with disabilities worldwide too. Disability in developing countries like in Uganda, Mexico, Brazil, India, China, Russia, Turkey, Egypt, Thailand, Vietnam, Haiti, and Jamaica have no access to education and medicine for a disabled child compared to the United States. In China, traditional Confucian beliefs see the birth of a child with a developmental disability as punishment for parental violations of traditional teachings like dishonesty or misconduct that is against Chinese moral society. Children with disabilities in Eastern Europe, like Russia, Ukraine, and Romania, were placed in orphanages and state institutes and run by the state in Soviet times until the Romanian Revolution of 1989 toppled the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu and replaced it with a new government. And later on in the 1990s, a lot of Americans wanted to see Romanian and Russian children be adopted by them before the adoption law was banned in 2013, thus forbidding him from adopting Russian orphans again. And the cultural views of autism are that, like in Saudi Arabia, it was important that a later age of diagnosis of autism in girls and boys rather than just in the United States. I was diagnosed earlier in 1999 and are expected to be outgoing like men, and girls are more expected to be shy like women because compared to Iran, its Islamic neighbor, a woman is half of a man under Iranian law, and they are expected to live in a male-dominated society, which is based on the Islamic beliefs and the Quran. According to human rights, under Brazilian law, judges determine the place of a child if they have a disability in an institution in exceptional cases where they have a risk of abandonment, neglect, or violence in case if they become orphans after their parents die, and there are no alternative solutions similar to Russia, and they have no improvisational theater techniques and no ABA therapy in Brazil, like in the United States, for example. Why they don't get access to education is that because in developing countries like Uganda and South Africa, they're the poorest country, the continent in the world. Most disabled children don't get access to education and employment like rural areas and villages, and kids they have to go abroad in Western countries like the United States and England and Australia to get help in order to get better for their lives. And 90% of children were living with a disability in developing countries are not in school, and there's little data to support these children according to Global Citizen. Some people with disabilities live in poverty and they have educational and social barriers. Just like in the United States, we have a lot of access to education and no social barriers at all. In conclusion, Ed Roberts, one of the greatest activists of all time, while he was at UC Berkeley, he advocated for the university staff to help them give access to ramps and wheelchairs because they have trouble going down the stairs, and needed to have elevators to get better access to them in order to have variety of the quality of life for them. That became the disability rights movement of the 1970s, inspired by the civil rights movement for African Americans in the 1960s, with the President L.B. Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that banned racial segregation against African Americans, and the Voting Rights Act that prevented the grandfather clause from voting like whites do, which is called suffrage in America. And also later on, Roberts became the director of the Department of Developmental Services by Governor Brown in 1976 or 1975 in order to change the system, and became the father of independent living. And that's why he wanted to place them in homes rather than just institutions, just like they did in Soviet times in Russia and Ukraine before. And later on, some new laws were passed, like the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, in order to get rehabilitation for their disability, in order to have a better life and be a member of society. And also, in the 1970s or the 1980s, a lot of children with disabilities have access to special education, just like with their aids, just like normal people do at school. That led to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, signed by George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush, our former president, from 2001-2009. And he signed the law that banned discrimination against Americans with disabilities in public places, like what the Civil Rights Act did before with African Americans. And for now, I'm living in the ADA generation. It helps me give equality and further chance of life in America. But what about disability rights in other developing countries? Are there laws any protected? And it says that disabilities were viewed as a curse from the devil in folk religions such as voodoo or witchcraft in Africa or Asia, where the mother gets it before pregnancy. And disabilities in developing countries lack resources from the government, who is not providing equality, which were treated like outcasts, just like in the Soviet era of Russia. And we want to be inspired by John Lennon's song, Imagine, which inspires inclusion personally. And it was a huge personal influence to my life because it promotes unity, peace, hope, and joy. And we wanted to live together in harmony, and the world will be as one. And we want the governments around the world in developing countries to do the same like America did, to pass disability laws, to give equal rights and be treated like normal people, and we will be as humans on planet Earth. Thank you.